Forget everything you thought you knew about the rugged, unstoppable wild boar. Across the dense forests of Europe and the marshlands of Asia, the ultimate survivor of the animal kingdom is facing a vanishing act so sudden and so unexplained that it has sent the scientific world into an absolute tailspin. We are talking about a creature that has outlived ice ages, survived human expansion, and thrived in almost every environment on the planet. But recently, wild boars have started disappearing in droves, vanishing from territories they have occupied for thousands of years. When researchers first noticed the empty forest floor, they expected to find a typical predator-prey imbalance, or perhaps a localized environmental shift. What they actually discovered when they looked closer at the soil and the biological markers of these elusive animals was something that shocked the global scientific community to its core. This isn't just about a drop in numbers. It is about a profound, silent transformation of our wilderness that points to a mystery hidden deep within the DNA of the forest itself. Today we are peeling back the leaves and looking into the shadows to understand why the world's boars are fading away and what the shocking truth reveals about the future of our natural world. To truly grasp why this is so significant, you have to understand the reputation of the wild boar. In the world of biology, boars are considered one of the most successful large mammals ever. They are intelligent, highly adaptable, and possess a reproductive rate that is more like a rodent than a large ungulate. A single sow can produce 2 litters of 6 to 10 piglets in a single year. They eat everything from roots and nuts to small animals and carrion. They have no problem living next to human cities or in the deepest, most remote mountains. Basically, boars are hard to get rid of. So when populations in certain hotspots began to plummet by 80 or 90% in just a few seasons, it wasn't just a red flag, it was a biological emergency. The mystery began in the vast, ancient woodlands of Eastern Europe and spread rapidly toward the west. Farmers and foresters who were used to seeing dozens of boars every night on their trail cameras began reporting total silence. The ground that was usually churned up by their powerful tusks remained flat and covered in moss. At first, many scientists thought it was a simple case of African swine fever. This is a well-known and devastating virus that affects porcine species. It is a terrifying illness, certainly, but it usually leaves very obvious signs behind. You see the evidence of the struggle everywhere. But in these new cases, the boars were simply gone. There were no remains to be found, no evidence of a long-term fight for survival. It was as if a massive, invisible hand had simply reached into the forest and plucked them out of existence. When researchers finally managed to capture a few survivors in these abandoned zones, what they found in their blood was nightmare fuel for any ecologist. It wasn't just a virus. They found that the boars were suffering from a complete collapse of their natural immunity, but not from any known disease. Instead, they discovered a level of radioactive cesium that was completely off the charts. Now, the initial thought was obvious. This must be a lingering effect of the Chernobyl disaster from Alsi. But here is where the story takes its first shocking turn. The radioactive signature in these boars didn't match the Chernobyl fallout. It was different. It was older, more complex, and it was coming from a source that scientists had completely forgotten about. Through advanced isotopic analysis, researchers at various European universities discovered that the boars were carrying the forbidden legacy of atmospheric nuclear weapons testing from the Boars and DAS. While the radioactive materials from Chernobyl had washed through many other animals and plants, the boars were uniquely tied to a specific food source that acted as a time capsule for radiation: the deer truffle. These fungi grow underground and act as a sponge for heavy metals and radioactive isotopes. Because these truffles grow slowly and deep in the soil, they are just now, decades later, absorbing the peak levels of radiation from mid-century bomb tests. The boars, being the only large animals with the strength and instinct to dig up these truffles in large quantities, were essentially becoming living, walking Geiger counters. And it was finally catching up to them. But radiation alone didn't explain the disappearing in droves part. Plenty of boars have lived with high radiation levels for years. The real shocker came when scientists looked at the secondary effect of this contamination. The radioactive load was causing a subtle but total shift in the boar's reproductive biology. The piglets were being born, but they weren't surviving their first week. They were born with hidden defects in their internal organs that made them unable to process a normal diet. The population wasn't being wiped out by a single event. It was failing to renew itself. The adults would live out their lives, and when they faded away, There was no next generation to take their place. This silent decline meant the population could look healthy one year and be completely gone, the next, leaving no trace behind. As the scientific world grappled with the radioactive truffle mystery, another cluster of boars began disappearing in the Far East, specifically in the snowy forests of Siberia and the mountains of South Korea. This time, the cause was entirely different but equally shocking. Biologists tracking the decline discovered that the boars were falling victim to a trophic cascade that involved a predator they didn't even know was competing with them. This wasn't about wolves or tigers. It was about a hidden shift in the forest's fruit and nut production, known as masting. For centuries, the oak and beech forests produced massive amounts of acorns and nuts every few years, providing a boom of food that supported huge boar populations. But due to subtle changes in temperature and rainfall patterns, these mast years have become unpredictable. The trees are confused. Instead of a massive feast every few years, they are producing small amounts of low-quality nuts every year. This has removed the surge of nutrients the boars need to survive the harsh winters. Without that layer of winter fat, the boars become susceptible to the smallest environmental stresses. Scientists found that even a mild cold snap was enough to cause massive losses because the boars simply didn't have the energy reserves. They were essentially fading away from a lack of peak nutrition, a phenomenon the scientists called metabolic thinning. One of the most intense nature projects currently underway to solve this is a massive rewilding experiment in the heart of Europe. Scientists are creating safe zones where they are trying to provide clean food sources to see if they can jumpstart a healthy, non-radioactive generation of boars. This involves thousands of acres of controlled forest management and a level of biological monitoring that is unprecedented for a wild species. They are using drones equipped with multispectral cameras to identify truffle hotspots and trying to find ways to dilute the radioactive soil. It is a giant, expensive battle against a legacy that was buried 60 years ago. But what really shocked the scientists was how the booms reacted to these disappearing members of their sounders. Wild boars are incredibly social. They live in tight-knit groups led by matriarchs. Researchers found that when a sounder begins to lose its members, the remaining boars suffer from extreme stress, which further suppresses their immune systems. They found high levels of cortisol in the hair samples of survivors. The disappearance of their family units was making them physically weaker. The boars weren't just dying of radiation or hunger. They were succumbing to a social collapse. The fabric of their society was falling apart. And in the wild, a lone boar is a vulnerable boar. Then there is the surprising role of the human shield. For decades, boars thrived because they learned to use human environments as a refuge. They ate our crops, raided our trash, and lived in the green corridors of our suburbs. But as the disappearances started, scientists realized that these human-adjacent boars were being hit by a new threat: chemical overloading. The boars in these areas were being found with massive concentrations of rodenticides and common herbicides in their livers. Because boars are rooters, they consume the soil itself when they dig for grubs. They were ingesting every chemical we have sprayed on our lawns and fields for the last 20 years. This chemical cocktail, combined with the other stresses, was the final straw. It didn't usually end the animal's life directly, but it made them so disoriented and lethargic that they would fail to find food or shelter, leading to their quiet disappearance into the undergrowth. The scale of this nature project is now becoming global. Scientists from Germany, Russia, China, and the US are sharing data in a race to understand if this is a temporary dip or a permanent shift. The shock that the scientists experienced wasn't just because the boars were fading, but because the boars are the ultimate indicator species. If a creature as tough and adaptable as a wild boar is struggling to survive in our modern forests, what does that mean for the thousands of more delicate species that live in their shadow? The boar is like the structural steel of the ecosystem. When it begins to rust and fail, the whole building is in trouble. One of the most fascinating nature projects born from this crisis is the isotope map of the wilderness. Biologists are literally mapping every square mile of the forest to find where the deep radiation is most concentrated. This is a massive geological and biological undertaking. They are discovering that the forest floor is not a static place, but a slow-moving river of elements. Things that we thought were gone 40 years ago are just now surfacing in the food chain. The boars have become the unintentional messengers of a past we thought we had cleaned up. In some areas of Germany, the government has had to intervene with a project that sounds like science fiction. They are treating large swaths of forest with Prussian blue, a chemical that binds to radioactive cesium and prevents it from being absorbed by plants and fungi. This is an attempt to clean the truffles, so the boars can eat them safely. It is a multi-million-euro effort to save a wild animal from a past human mistake. The success of this project is still uncertain, but it represents one of the most proactive nature interventions in history. The shocked scientist headline in the journals wasn't just clickbait. It referred to the fact that the scientists realized our standard models for wildlife recovery are totally inadequate for a world where legacy pollution and climate shifts interact. We used to think that if you just stop hunting an animal or protect its forest, it will bounce back. But the boar disappearance tells us that protection is not enough when the soil itself is the enemy. It is a total paradigm shift in conservation biology. What happened next in the study was perhaps the most heart-wrenching part. Researchers began finding ghost sounders, small groups of boars that showed almost no activity. They weren't breeding, they weren't traveling, they were just existing. It was as if the spark of the species had been extinguished. This led to a new theory of biological burnout. The constant stress of low-level radiation, unpredictable food supplies, and chemical exposure had reached a tipping point where the animals' neurological systems were simply shutting down. They weren't disappearing because they were being caught or eaten. They were disappearing because they were losing the will and the ability to find their own place in the world. To combat this, a new international nature project called the Boar Corridor has been proposed. The idea is to create massive, pristine highways of land that connect clean forest zones across borders. This would allow boars to migrate away from hotspots of contamination and follow better food sources. It is a project of continental scale involving diplomats as much as biologists. It treats the European forest as one single living organism that needs to be healed. What is happening to the wild boar is a wake-up call for all of us. These are the survivors. These are the tough guys. If they are disappearing in droves, it means the rules of the wild have changed. Scientists are realizing that we are entering a new nature, where the shadows of the 20th century are merging with the climate challenges of the 21st. The boars are the first to show the symptoms of this merger because they live so close to the earth, literally holding its history in their mouths every time they dig for a truffle. The project to track these boars has also led to the discovery of resilience hubs. In certain high-altitude regions or deep limestone valleys, boar populations are actually thriving or even growing. Scientists are now rushing to study these boars to see if they have developed a genetic mutation that allows them to process radiation better, or if the soil in these specific areas has a chemical makeup that neutralizes the toxins. These resilience boars might hold the key to the survival of the entire species. Their DNA is being mapped with the same intensity usually reserved for human medical research. The mystery of the disappearing in droves event also highlighted the importance of microscopic nature. We often focus on the big things, the trees, the boars, the rain. But the scientists were shocked to find that a huge part of the problem was the collapse of the soil's bacterial and fungal networks. The radiation and chemicals weren't just hitting the boars, they were degrading the underground internet that connects the forest. When the fungi and bacteria fail, the truffles fail, and the whole system that supports the boar collapses. This realization has turned the Boar Project into a soil healing project. As the wild boar continues to vanish from parts of its range, the impact on the forest is immediate. Boars are known as nature's tillers. They turn over the soil, allowing seeds to germinate and helping to decompose organic matter. Without them, the forest becomes stagnant. The leaf litter becomes too thick, the soil becomes too compacted, and new trees struggle to grow. The disappearance of the boar is actually causing the forest itself to age prematurely and stop regenerating. It is a slow-motion environmental transition that is changing the very air we breathe. The global effort to save the wild boar is now involving citizen scientists as well. People across Europe and Asia are being asked to report any ghost sightings or empty forest zones. This level of public engagement for a species that was often considered a pest shows how much our perspective has changed. We have realized that a forest without its boars is a forest that is failing. The shock of the scientists has become the concern of the public. One of the most optimistic parts of this massive nature project is the development of bioremediation zones. These are areas where specific plants are grown to suck up the radiation and chemicals from the soil before the boars get to it. It is a biological vacuum cleaning of the forest floor. If this works, It could be the blueprint for cleaning up vast areas of the planet that have been touched by human industry. The boars, in their struggle, have forced us to develop technologies that could save us all. In the end, the story of why wild boars are disappearing in droves is a story about the long reach of history. It is a story that tells us nothing ever truly goes away. The bomb tests of 60 years ago are the invisible predators of today, but it is also a story of hope. It is a story of scientists around the world refusing to let a species fade, working together on a scale never seen before to heal the soil and protect the wild. The next time you are in a forest and you see the churned up earth or the deep tracks of a boar, you know that you are looking at a survivor. You are looking at an animal that is carrying the burden of our past and the hope of our future. The boars are still out there, in fewer numbers, but they are fighting. And thanks to the shocking discoveries made by scientists, we are finally learning how to fight alongside them. The massive nature project to restabilize the boar populations will take decades. It will require us to rethink how we use chemicals on our land and how we manage our radioactive legacies. But the boars have shown us that even in the face of a silent collapse, nature is tenacious. We found the ghost sounders. We found the radioactive truffles. And we found the chemical overloading. Now, we are finding the solutions. The disappearing boars have taught us that we cannot hide from our history, but we can learn from it. The forest is not a separate thing from us. It is a part of the same system. When the boars dig in the dirt, they are digging in our shared home. The nightmare fuel of the moose and the shocking mystery of the boar are two sides of the same coin. They are the signals that it is time for a new era of nature management, one that is as deep and complex as the forest itself. As the sun sets over the Black Forest or the Siberian taiga, the remaining boars step out from the shadows. They are fewer now, but they are being watched over by a global network of science. Every GPS pinger, every soil sample, and every rewilding zone is a promise to the wild that we are listening. The mystery of the boars is no longer a mystery. It is a mission. And as long as there is a single sow and her piglets rooting in the clean soil of a new corridor, there is a future for the wild boar. The scientific community is no longer just shocked. They are mobilized. They are working to ensure that the droves of boars returning to the forest are healthy, vibrant, and free from the shadows of the past. It is the ultimate nature project, and it is happening right now under our feet and among the trees. The boars are coming back, one corridor and one non-radioactive truffle at a time. The silence in the forest is finally being broken by the sounds of the survivors. And that is the best ending anyone could have hoped for. Stay curious about the wild, look for the tracks in the mud. And remember that our actions today are the soil our children's nature will grow in. The world of the wild boar is our world too. And together we are making it whole again.